My daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Get out of my house, you old parasite." She said it with a smile like it was the most natural thing in the world. The problem is, that house was mine. I bought it after my husband died. I paid for every brick, every repair, every flower in the yard. But that morning she stood there with her family, laughing as if I no longer existed. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just turned around and walked away. They thought the story ended there, but it was only beginning. If you've ever been betrayed by the people you trusted the most, stay with me. You'll want to hear what happened next. When I drove back to Magnolia House after 6 months, I didn't expect anything unusual. It was a quiet morning in Savannah. The air smelled of salt and wet grass, the same way it always did near the river. That old road was so familiar I could almost drive it with my eyes closed. I had taken it hundreds of times. Every curve, every mailbox, every oak tree felt like part of my life. But that day, something felt off. As soon as I turned into the lane, I saw cars. Not one or two, at least 5, lined up in front of my gate. Big, shiny ones. I slowed down. I didn't recognize any of them. I parked by the fence, thinking maybe there was a mistake. But then I heard music. Loud, careless music, and laughter coming from the backyard. It didn't sound like my house anymore. My heart started beating faster. I stepped out of the car. The air was thick and warm, and the closer I got, the more I realized something was terribly wrong. There were empty cans on the grass, a grill smoking near the porch. My flower beds were trampled. The chairs I painted last spring were covered in wet towels and crumbs. Kids were running around, kicking a ball that hit the walls again and again. For a second, I thought maybe my son, Michael, had decided to visit. Maybe he brought Claire and the kids without telling me. That would have been strange, but at least it would make sense. But then I saw faces I didn't know, strangers walking in and out of my porch, holding drinks, laughing like they owned the place. I froze. Magnolia House wasn't just a building. It was everything I'd worked for after my husband died. Every paycheck, every night spent sewing and saving went into that place. And now, standing there, it didn't even look like mine. The wooden steps creaked under my feet. There were stains on the boards, cigarette ashes in the planters. Someone had thrown their shoes by the door. A woman's purse was hanging from the handle. I tried to calm down. Maybe there was an explanation. I took the keys out of my bag. They felt heavier than usual. When I reached the front door, I saw something that made my stomach turn. One of the curtains was open. I looked inside. There were people in my living room. A man in a Hawaiian shirt sitting on my couch, his feet up on the table. A little girl running around with sticky hands. And in the middle of it all, standing by my kitchen island, was Claire, my daughter-in-law. She was wearing my favorite apron, the one I sewed myself 10 years ago. She was laughing, her phone in one hand, a glass of wine in the other. I just stood there looking at her, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I opened the door. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the soft, clean scent I always loved. It smelled like sweat, smoke, and cheap food. The floor was sticky. There were stains on the counter. My house felt invaded. "Claire?" I said quietly. She turned around slowly, almost bored. Her eyes met mine, for a second before she smiled, not kindly, but like she was amused. "Oh," she said, "you're here?" Just 2 words. But the way she said them, as if I was the one who didn't belong, made my heart sink. I looked around again, still hoping this was some kind of misunderstanding. There were plates on the table I'd never seen before, suitcases in the corner, toys everywhere. It wasn't a visit. They had moved in. I wanted to speak, to ask what was going on, but nothing came out. I just stood there, gripping my keys, feeling like the walls were closing in. Claire turned back to her phone, completely ignoring me. Someone called her from outside, and she shouted back, "Yeah, I'm coming," like it was her house. I took a step back. The laughter, the smell, the music, it all blurred together. I felt small, invisible, like I had stepped into someone else's life. That's when the truth hit me. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had taken what was mine. I stepped outside again, breathing hard. The morning sun hit my face, but I couldn't feel its warmth. The house I had built, the house I loved, had been taken from me. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just stood there for a long time, staring at the porch. Something cold moved through me. Not fear, not sadness, but a kind of quiet anger I hadn't felt in years. A voice inside me whispered, "Someone is living the life you built." And I knew right then, this wasn't over. I was just about to unlock the door when it swung open from the inside. Claire stood there, hair still wet, my apron tied around her waist, holding a cup of coffee like she'd lived there for years. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't friendly at all. "You're here early, Margaret," she said, her tone calm but sharp. "We really don't have space for you." I blinked, thinking I'd misheard her. "What do you mean, no space?" Behind her, I could see movement. A woman who looked like her mother, 2 kids running across the hallway, and a man carrying a cooler through the living room. Someone had hung beach towels on my stair rail. A dog barked from the backyard. Claire didn't move aside. She leaned against the doorframe, casual, confident, like she was the one welcoming me into her house. "Michael said this house belongs to the family," she continued. "You live alone in Atlanta. It's only fair that the next generation gets to enjoy it." Her words hit like a slap. The next generation? Enjoy it? I stared at her, my keys still in my hand. "Claire," I said slowly, "this house is mine. I paid for it. Every bill, every repair, every tax. It's under my name." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. Don't start with that again. Michael told me you always make things complicated. It's a family house. You built it for everyone, right?" "No," I said quietly. "I built it because I needed a home." That made her laugh, a dry, humorless laugh that echoed down the hall. "A home? You already have one in Atlanta. Why do you need 2? You're hardly ever here." I opened my mouth to answer, but her mother stepped into view, an older woman with bleached hair and too much perfume, holding a coffee mug like she owned the place too. "So this is the famous Margaret I've heard so much about," she said, looking me up and down. "I thought you'd be taller. You look ordinary." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. I could feel the heat rising in my chest. Behind her, 2 teenagers were laughing, whispering to each other, probably wondering why an old woman had just walked into their house. I glanced around again. My living room was filled with their things. Clothes on the chairs, toys on the floor, grocery bags on my kitchen counter. Every trace of me had been buried under their mess. "This isn't your house," I said firmly, turning back to Claire. "You shouldn't be here." She sighed, impatient. "Margaret, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Michael said we could use it whenever we wanted. You're barely here anyway." "Michael said that?" "Yes. And he's right. It's not healthy for you to hold on to everything. You need to learn to share. We're family." Family. That word suddenly felt like poison. I had spent my whole life building that house after my husband died. It was my one safe place, my proof that hard work meant something. And now they were standing there telling me I didn't belong in it. "Claire," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm, "you can't just move into someone's home and decide it's yours. That's not how family works." "Oh, please," she said, her smile fading. "You're overreacting. We've done nothing wrong. You left this place empty for months. We're using it. That's all." Using it. The way she said it made me feel sick. Her mother crossed her arms. "Why don't you just stay somewhere else for a while? There's no room left here. The kids have taken the guest rooms." "The guest rooms?" I repeated quietly. "Yes," Claire said. "We made some changes. It's more practical this way. You know, families grow. You can't expect us to live in that tiny apartment in town when this house is sitting here empty." I couldn't speak. The noise of their voices filled my head. Laughter from the kids, music from the backyard, the clatter of dishes from my kitchen. I had never felt so out of place in my own home. Claire looked at me again, her tone softening just a little, but not out of kindness. "Look, it's not personal. You've had a good life here. It's time to let go a little. We'll take good care of it." Take good care of it. The words twisted inside me like a knife. I finally found my voice. "Claire, this house is not yours to take care of. It's mine." Her eyes went cold. "Not for long if you keep acting like this. Michael said we might have to make some changes. You know, legally. To make things easier for everyone." I froze. "Legally?" She shrugged, pretending it was nothing. "Don't worry about it. Just trust your son. He knows what's best." Behind her, her mother smirked. Someone turned the music louder. The sound of it filled the air between us, and for a moment I couldn't hear my own heartbeat. That was when it truly hit me. They weren't just visiting. They were taking over. Every smile, every word, every gesture, it all made sense now. They were talking to me like I was in their way, like I was some unwanted guest. I looked at Claire one last time. She was still blocking the doorway, arms crossed, her face calm and confident, and I realized what she really saw when she looked at me. Not a mother, not a woman who had built this house, just someone old, someone useless, someone who no longer mattered. A chill ran down my spine. That was the moment I understood. They weren't just asking me to leave. They were talking to me like I was a parasite. That was the moment I understood. They weren't asking me to leave. They were talking to me like I was a parasite. I tried one last time to stay calm. "Claire," I said, my voice low but steady, "this house is under my name. It's mine." She didn't even blink. Her lips curled into that same smirk I'd seen earlier. "Then, maybe," she said, "it's time to fix that." The words hung in the air, heavy and cruel. Before I could respond, her mother let out a loud laugh. "Oh, come on," she said. "Women like you cling to bricks because you've got nothing else left." The room fell quiet for a second, and then everyone started laughing, a cruel, careless laughter that filled every corner of my living room. The same room where I used to host Christmas dinners, birthdays, quiet mornings with coffee and radio. Now it was filled with strangers laughing at me in my own home. I took a step back, trying to hold myself together. My fingers tightened around my keys. All I wanted to do was scream, but something inside told me not to give them the satisfaction. "Where's Michael?" I asked, forcing my voice not to shake. "He's at work," Claire said, shrugging. "He told me to handle it. You know how busy he is." Handle it? Like I was some kind of problem to be dealt with. "Claire, I built this house," I said. "After your father-in-law died, I worked day and night to pay for it. Brick by brick. You can't just—" "Oh, please," she cut me off, rolling her eyes. "You're not the only one who's ever worked hard, Margaret. You've had your time. Now it's ours." Her mother nodded, still smiling. "It's sad, really," she said to no one in particular. "Some people just don't know when to step aside." Their laughter started again, softer this time, but sharper, like small knives. The kind of laughter that tells you you're no longer respected, no longer welcome. I stood there, surrounded by people who looked at me like I was invisible. My own daughter-in-law, her mother, her sister, their kids, all of them treating me like some unwanted guest who had overstayed her welcome. I looked around one last time. The flowers I planted were gone. The framed photos I hung had been replaced with theirs. Even the smell of the house was different. Something in me cracked quietly but completely. "Fine," I said softly. "You want the house? Enjoy it." Claire tilted her head, pretending to be surprised. "Are you leaving already? That's probably for the best." I didn't answer. I stepped toward the door. As I reached for the handle, I heard her voice behind me, loud, mocking, meant for everyone to hear. "Enjoy your hotel stay, old freeloader." The words hit harder than I expected. Old freeloader, a parasite. That's what I'd become to them. The woman who owned the house but didn't belong in it anymore. Their laughter followed me out to the porch. Rain had started to fall, soft at first, then heavier, turning the wooden steps slick beneath my shoes. I kept walking, refusing to turn around. My car was waiting at the end of the driveway, wet leaves sticking to the windshield. I opened the door, sat down, and for a moment I just stared through the glass. The lights of the house glowed faintly behind the curtain of rain. They were still laughing inside. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel, but my eyes were dry. I wasn't going to cry for people who had decided I didn't matter. For a long minute, I just sat there, listening to the rain hitting the roof of the car. It was strange. The silence inside the car felt louder than all the noise behind me. I thought of all the years I'd spent in that house, repainting walls, fixing leaks, planting roses, waiting for Michael to visit. And now, I was the one standing outside in the rain, like a stranger passing by. I took a deep breath and started the engine. The wipers swept across the glass, clearing my view of the long driveway lined with wet magnolia leaves. As I drove away, the lights of the house grew smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror. Something cold settled inside me. Not sadness, not fear, but a kind of calm that only comes after you stop trying to be understood. They thought they had won. They thought the old woman had finally given up. But they were wrong. Because in that very moment, as I drove away under the rain, something inside me shifted. It was quiet but powerful, the beginning of something they would never see coming. They didn't know it yet, but when I left that house, they had just lit the fuse. and the storm was already on its way. They didn't know it yet, but when I left that house, they had just lit the fuse, and the storm was already on its way. The next morning, I drove back to Magnolia House. I hadn't slept much. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy, thick with the smell of wet earth and moss. I told myself I was only going to pick up a few personal things. Nothing more. No arguments, no scenes. When I parked by the gate, the same cars were still there, lined up like they'd been parked for weeks. Music was playing again, low but constant. It was strange how quickly my home had turned into someone else's routine. I walked up the steps and rang the bell. It was the first time in my life I'd ever had to ring my own doorbell. After a few seconds, the door cracked open. A young woman appeared, Claire's sister, Ava. Her hair was messy, her face tired, and she looked at me like I just interrupted something important. "Oh," she said flatly, "it's you." "I came to get a few of my things," I said. She rolled her eyes. "Your stuff's in the garage. Don't make a scene, okay?" Before I could answer, she turned and walked away, leaving the door open just enough for me to enter. The moment I stepped inside, I froze. The smell hit me like a slap, a mix of cigarette smoke, fried oil, cheap perfume, and something rotten underneath. My clean, quiet house was gone. The white walls were stained. The floor that I used to polish every spring was sticky. The rugs were covered with footprints, mud, and spilled drinks. I moved through the hallway slowly, almost afraid to look too closely. Everywhere I turned, there was chaos. Shoes piled by the stairs, dirty dishes on the console table, someone's phone charger plugged into the wall near my framed photo of Michael as a child. Except the photo wasn't there anymore. When I reached the living room, my heart sank. The painting I made of my husband, the one that had hung over the mantel for 30 years, was gone. In its place was a big framed selfie of Claire's family, smiling on this very porch. I felt something twist inside me. My embroidered cushions were stained with grease. The sofa smelled like smoke. A dog toy, wet and chewed, lay on the rug I'd bought in Charleston. I walked toward the kitchen, still trying to breathe evenly. The air was thick with the smell of burnt food and cleaning spray. The counters were cluttered with plastic cups, half-eaten food, and baby bottles. I ran my hand over the countertop, the same one I'd picked out 10 years ago after saving for months. It was sticky, the sink was overflowing with dishes, and I could hear flies buzzing near the trash bin. Then I saw something that made my stomach turn. One of my fine porcelain plates, from the set I'd collected one by one, was broken in half on the floor. Another was being used as an ashtray. I picked it up gently, brushing off the ashes. It was cracked beyond repair. It felt like holding a piece of my own past that someone had carelessly shattered. I took a deep breath and went upstairs. The sound of a TV played somewhere in the background, laughter echoing through the hall. My heart pounded harder with every step. When I reached the master bedroom, my bedroom, the door was wide open. Inside, on my bed, lay Claire's mother. She was half sitting against the pillows, cigarette in one hand, scrolling through her phone. Smoke curled toward the ceiling, leaving dark stains above the headboard. Her shoes were on my comforter. My nightstand was covered in makeup, tissues, and an empty glass of wine. She looked at me without surprise, just annoyance. "Oh, it's you," she said, like I was a stranger who'd walked into her hotel room. "Claire said you were coming. Don't worry, I packed your clothes. They're in the garage. You should thank me, really." She laughed and turned back to her phone. I stepped farther into the room. My closet doors were open. Inside, I saw my clothes crammed into plastic bags. Expensive blouses wrinkled, shoes thrown on top of one another, dresses folded like rags. A box of jewelry lay open on the dresser, half empty. The small silver frame with my husband's picture was missing. I tried to speak, but no words came out. I just stood there, feeling my pulse in my ears. Every part of this house had been violated. The bed where I used to read before sleep was now her resting spot. The closet that held my life's memories was stripped bare, and the walls that once held my laughter were echoing with strangers' voices. I turned to leave, but something on the floor caught my eye, a trail of cigarette ash leading to my old jewelry box. The lid was open, and I saw that my mother's brooch, the one she'd left me when she died, was gone. My throat tightened. I walked out, passing through the hallway. The sound of children shouting came from one of the guest rooms, my guest room. The walls were covered with stickers and drawings. One of my paintings was leaning against the wall, torn at the corner, used as a backing for a poster. When I reached the garage, the air was thick with the smell of dust and gasoline. Black trash bags were piled against the wall, my things thrown together carelessly. I knelt and opened one. Inside were clothes, family photos, my old sewing kit, and a stack of letters tied with ribbon. They'd stuffed 30 years of my life into garbage bags. I felt something break inside me. I wanted to scream, but instead, I just stood there, silent. My hands were shaking, but my eyes stayed dry, because crying wouldn't fix this. Crying wouldn't make them see what they'd done. I looked around one last time. The car oil stains on the floor, the flickering light, the piles of my things like trash. That's when I understood. Magnolia House, the home I had built, the place I loved, was gone. It still stood there, but it wasn't mine anymore. The people inside had taken more than walls and furniture. They had taken my history, my dignity, my peace. And as I walked back toward the front door, I realized something else, something darker. They didn't just take my home. They made sure I would never feel at home again. I don't even remember deciding to go back upstairs that day. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the part of me that still believed I could fix something. The noise downstairs was still going, voices, laughter, footsteps. But up there, the air was heavier. Quiet in a wrong kind of way. When I entered my bedroom, the smell hit me first. Cigarette smoke, perfume, and something stale in the air. Claire's mother wasn't there anymore, but her mess was. A half-empty glass of wine stood on my nightstand. Her scarf was tossed across my bed like it belonged to her. I didn't stop to clean or look around. I went straight to the oak wardrobe. That wardrobe had a secret. My husband built it years ago, back when we were still young enough to think we'd have forever. Behind the drawers, hidden by a small latch, there was a space where we kept everything important. The property deed, the savings documents, insurance papers. Only Michael and I ever knew about it. He was just a boy when I showed him how to open it. I shouldn't have. My hands trembled as I pulled the drawers out. The small lock behind them was scratched. Someone had forced it open. The wood was splintered, the latch hanging loose. I felt my chest tighten as I pulled the panel away and saw the mess inside. All the papers I had carefully folded were now wrinkled, thrown together without care. Some were even stained, as if someone had stepped on them. Among the old receipts and envelopes, there was a folder I didn't recognize. New paper, clean edges, a label typed in bold, property adjustment. I opened it and my stomach dropped. The first document read, Application for Transfer of Ownership, Michael Hale. My son's name written neatly at the top. Below it, a series of printed forms, legal sections, notary boxes, and a signature that was supposed to be mine. I stared at it for a long time. It looked close, but not right. The way the pen dragged, the slant of the letters, the uneven pressure, it was fake. Someone had copied my name from another document. I could see where the ink had hesitated, like the person wasn't sure how to shape the next letter. Then I saw the second page. A medical report. Cognitive assessment. Margaret Hale. I didn't need to read the rest to feel the blood rush from my face, but I did anyway. Patient shows signs of cognitive decline, unfit to manage assets or financial decisions independently. For a second, I just sat there, staring at those words. It felt like someone had kicked me in the chest. The report was signed by a doctor I'd never met, from a clinic I didn't recognize. The stamp was crooked, the date uneven, and the signature looked like it had been traced from another sheet. At the bottom corner of the page, written in blue pen, were a few words I knew instantly, Claire's handwriting. She had that messy loop in her R that I'd seen on birthday cards before. It said, once R signs, sell it fast. R meant Michael, my son. They were planning for him to sign once the papers were ready. I sat down on the floor, my knees weak, the folder slipping from my hands. The papers scattered across the carpet, catching the light from the window. They looked harmless, but I knew what they were, proof that my own family was preparing to erase me. I picked up another page. A real estate appraisal. Magnolia House, estimated value, $340,000. Underneath, Claire had written another note, enough to pay debts, school, and the new car. That's when it became clear. They weren't just using the house. They had planned everything. The fake report, the forged signature, the transfer. They weren't going to wait for me to die. They wanted me declared incompetent so they could sell the house while I was still alive. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I couldn't tell if I was breathing. The sound from downstairs blurred together. Laughter, a TV, someone calling out Claire's name. All of it distant, like it belonged to another world. I began gathering the papers one by one, folding them carefully even though my hands were shaking. I couldn't leave them there. I needed proof. Every document went into my bag. The fake transfer, the report, the appraisal. My life reduced to evidence in a case I hadn't even filed yet. As I zipped the bag, I heard her voice. Claire's voice. It was faint, coming from the hallway, but every word was sharp enough to cut through the silence. "Don't worry, Mom," she said. "The lawyer said once we prove she's not all there, it's just paperwork. Michael signs, and it's done. The doctor already gave us the report. $50 and a signature. Easy." Her mother laughed softly, then said something I couldn't catch. Claire replied, "I told you she has no idea. She'll find out when it's too late." I stayed frozen where I was, clutching the bag, trying not to breathe. My own daughter-in-law was planning my legal death, to make me disappear on paper before I could fight back. When their voices faded, I stood up. My legs felt weak, but something inside me was steady now, like a switch had flipped. The fear that had kept me small was gone. What replaced it wasn't anger, at least not the loud kind. It was something colder. They thought they had me cornered. They thought age made me blind, slow, confused. But what they didn't know was that I'd been through worse. I had buried a husband, raised a son alone, and built this house from nothing. I looked down at the folder again, at the shaky imitation of my name, at the line that said unfit to manage assets. That one line could have erased everything I'd ever done. They weren't just stealing my home. They were rewriting who I was. I slipped the folder deeper into my bag, zipped it tight, and walked out of the room. From the doorway, I looked back once more. The morning light hit the papers, still left on the floor, glowing like ashes after a fire. And I knew, standing there, that they had no idea what they'd just started. They weren't just stealing my home, they were planning to declare me insane to make it legal. The rain hadn't stopped all morning. It fell soft and steady, tapping against the porch railing like a slow clock. I stood there, half hidden behind one of the columns, just trying to breathe. I had gone out to clear my head, to calm down before deciding what to do next. I didn't plan to listen. But then I heard Claire's voice. She was standing near the open kitchen window, talking on the phone, her tone low and quick. I could only see her silhouette through the thin curtain. She was pacing back and forth, one hand holding her mug, the other pressed against her ear. "The doctor's cheap, Mom. $50 and he'll say she's losing it. Once we file, the house is ours." My body went still. For a moment, the sound of the rain was the only thing that existed. Her mother's voice came through the speaker, loud enough to carry over the music inside. "Are you sure about Michael? He doesn't seem convinced." Claire sighed, annoyed, her tone sharp. "He'll sign. He's desperate. Between the bills and his job, he's got no choice. Once the paperwork's ready, he'll do whatever I tell him." I leaned against the porch column to steady myself. My heart was pounding, but my hands were cold. Every word came through clear, each one cutting deeper than the last. They weren't guessing. They weren't planning. They were already doing it. This wasn't just greed, it was coordination, calculation. They had bought a false report, forged my name, and manipulated my own son into signing away everything I'd built. Claire's laughter carried through the open window, short, satisfied, cruel. By the time she figures it out, it'll be too late. The doctor's writing up the report tonight. He's done it before, Mom. People don't question it when it's old age. Her mother chuckled. You're smart, Claire. That's how you survive. Sentiment makes people weak. I gripped the railing tighter, my fingers pressing into the wet wood. I could feel the drizzle seeping through my sleeves, but I didn't move. My head was spinning, but my eyes stayed fixed on the blurred figure behind the curtain. I remembered every moment I had helped her, the money I'd lent them when Michael lost his job, the babysitting, the house keys I'd trusted her with. All of it came flooding back like a cruel joke. I thought I was giving my family a future. Turns out I was handing them the weapon to destroy me. My breath came out uneven, shaky, but not from fear. I wasn't scared anymore, not of losing the house, not of being called names. It was something else, something colder, steadier, that started deep inside and spread slowly, like frost over glass. I listened to her voice a few seconds longer. Once the lawyer gets the signed form, it's done, Claire said. I'll make it quick. She won't even understand what's happening. She'll think it's some tax thing. Her words were casual, almost lazy, like she was talking about redecorating a room, not destroying someone's life. And just like that, I understood. There was no misunderstanding, no mistake, no emotion. This was intentional, planned, practiced. The kind of betrayal that doesn't come from strangers. It comes from people who've watched you long enough to know exactly where to strike. The phone call ended with Claire's laughter. I heard her hum softly as she walked away, the sound fading into the noise of the house. The rain kept falling, a quiet rhythm against the metal roof. I stayed where I was, staring into the wet yard. Everything felt distant. The cars, the sound of the river, the lights from inside. My body was shaking, but not because I was cold. It was the kind of trembling that comes when your body realizes something before your mind does. When anger hasn't turned into words yet, but it's already awake. They thought I was weak. They thought I would retreat quietly, fade into the background like all old women do when the world moves on without them. But they were wrong. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of them. Not of losing the house. Because now I had proof. And purpose. I looked out over the porch rail, the rain glinting in the pale light, and for the first time in months, I felt completely still. The fear, the humiliation, the heartbreak. They were still there, but under them was something sharper, stronger. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. They had stolen my peace, my trust, and tried to steal my name. But they hadn't taken everything. They hadn't taken my will. And standing there in the rain, I realized something simple and terrifying. I wasn't shaking because I was scared. I was shaking because I was awake. I knew I had to act fast, so the next morning I walked into Savannah Central Bank and went straight to the service desk like I always did. The clerk looked up, recognized me, and gave a polite smile that made me feel for a moment like I hadn't been reduced to a rumor overnight. I told him I needed the bank to flag any unusual activity on my accounts and to place a temporary hold on any transfers. He didn't hesitate. He ran my name, pulled up the records, and said, "You always saved every cent, Mrs. Hale. We can lock down suspicious transactions and send alerts. If you want, I can prepare a formal hold request for you right now." I handed him the list of recent withdrawals and the dates I thought were odd. He took the paper with careful hands and promised to notify me and the fraud department immediately if anything moved. The manager, a steady man I'd seen at the branch for years, came over and added, "If you need testimony in court, we can provide records and statements. We'll do everything to protect your accounts." For the first time since this started, something felt solid beneath my feet. It was small, a bank telling the truth, but it mattered. That afternoon, I walked up the narrow steps to Victor Carmichael's office. The building smelled of old books and cleaning polish. The plaque with his name caught the late light, Victor Carmichael, Elder Rights Attorney. I'd taught Victor to mix color when he was a boy in my classroom. Now he opened the door with a firm handshake and the same steady eyes. He invited me into a meeting room and sat down across from me, his expression immediate and focused. I laid everything on the table. I gave him the folder with the forged transfer application, the fake medical report, the appraisal with Claire's handwriting at the bottom, the list of missing jewelry, and the photos I'd taken in the rooms. I told him the exact words I'd overheard: the cheap doctor, the $50, the plan to have Michael sign once the paperwork was ready. I did not add flourishes. I did not beg for pity. I recited facts, dates, names, and the way Claire said certain things. Victor listened, his jaw set, occasionally flipping a page, sometimes leaning forward as if to pull the story tighter into focus. When I finished, he folded his hands and looked at me carefully. "This is not just a family fight," he said. "This is fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. Depending on how the documents were produced and who really signed them, we have grounds for civil relief and possible criminal charges." He explained step by step what needed to be done. Preserve originals and get certified copies from the bank, contact the county clerk to check for any recorded instruments, and have the documents examined by a forensic handwriting analyst. He spoke of the medical report as the most dangerous piece. If it was submitted to a court or financial institution, it could be used to strip you of decision-making power. He said we would have to report the clinician and involve the medical board. He did not sugarcoat the work ahead. There would be motions to file, emergency petitions to request a temporary restraining order or an injunction to bar any transfer, and paperwork to ask the sheriff to enforce any court order if necessary. There would be costs for investigators and experts, fees for filings. He laid out an estimate and the paths to potential recovery of legal costs if we won. He also listed practical moves the bank and I could make immediately to stop transfers and freeze assets while we assembled the complaint. Then he said the thing I had been waiting and dreading to hear: "If you pursue this, Mrs. Hale, it will be public. Your son's name will be on the filings. He will be subpoenaed. Their behavior will be exposed." He did not say it to frighten me. He said it so I would know. He wanted me to be ready for the fallout. He explained that families often break under the pressure of legal battles, and that reconciliation may not be possible once the process began. I sat very still and thought of the young student who once mixed his first palette on my table, the small hands, the frantic pride when a painting came alive. I thought of Michael's childhood and of the man who now might choose silence over truth. I thought of every hour I had spent saving and repairing, every small sacrifice that brought this house into being. If confronting them meant losing him as a son forever, then perhaps that was a truth I needed to accept. He had already made a choice by allowing their plan to proceed. "Do it," I said finally, and my voice was quieter than I expected, but steady. "Start the emergency petition. Freeze what you can. Report the doctor. I will cover the initial fees." Victor nodded a small grave motion and reached for the telephone to start the next move. He began by contacting the bank to confirm the hold and ask them to prepare certified statements. He arranged for a forensic analyst to review the documents and drafted the language for the temporary order to keep any transfer from going through. As he worked, he walked me through the strategy in plain terms. Evidence first, court petition next, pressure in public through official reports, and then the civil action for damages and the return of property. He advised me to document every contact with Michael, Claire, and any third parties, and to avoid confrontations that could be used against me. He urged discretion about the criminal complaint until we had solid proof the signature and the report were false. He told me that the community would notice, neighbors would ask, gossip would start, and the strain on family would be almost certain. I accepted that, because some things were bigger than appearances. Before I left, Victor paused and said, "You taught me how to see what's true on a canvas. Now we'll use facts to prove what's true in this life. We will show the court, and the city, what they did." He placed his hand over mine for a moment, a gesture that felt like a promise rather than a pity. I left his office with a list of what to collect next, copies to make, names of people to call, and a plan that felt like armor. Outside, the streetlights were coming on, and the river glowed faintly beyond the trees. I walked toward my car with the documents clutched to my chest and a strange calm filling me. The humiliation and the hurt had not disappeared, but they had been channeled into something sharp and organized. There was work to do, and I would do it. When justice stands with the elderly, memory is no longer a burden. It becomes a weapon. I wasn't sleeping much those days. Between the paperwork, the lawyers, and the silence from Michael, nights felt endless. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that hums inside your ears. I kept checking locks, alarms, cameras, anything that made me feel in control again. That's when I remembered the small security system I had installed years ago. It was old, probably outdated, but still there, hidden in the cabinet under the stairs. The problem was, I had no idea how to pull anything from it. So the next afternoon I knocked on my neighbor's door. Ethan Parker lived next to Magnolia House, a young software engineer who worked from home and occasionally helped me with the Wi-Fi when it acted up. He looked surprised when he opened the door. "Mrs. Hale, everything okay?" "I need your help with something technical," I said, holding up the old hard drive. "I think there might be something important on this." Within minutes, Ethan followed me back across the yard, carrying his laptop and a few cables. He was polite, cautious. He could sense this wasn't a casual visit. We set up on my dining table, the hard drive humming softly between us. He plugged it in, eyes flicking across the screen as lines of code appeared. "This is pretty old," he said half to himself. "Looks like the recordings were deleted, but maybe not overwritten. Let's check your old CCTV drive." He clicked through folders, bypassing corrupt files, and the monitor flickered to life. For a moment, the screen stayed black, then static. Then an image began to form. Grainy, distorted, but clear enough to see faces. The living room. My living room. Claire was standing near the window, her arms crossed. Her mother sat on my sofa, legs crossed, holding a glass of wine. The date in the corner read 2 weeks before I'd come back to the house. Ethan turned up the volume. The voices crackled at first, but soon became sharp enough to make every word land like a slap. "Once she's declared incompetent," Claire said, pacing back and forth, "it's just paperwork. Michael signs and it's done. I already talked to the lawyer. He'll process the transfer as soon as the doctor's report is submitted." Her mother laughed lightly. "You're doing the right thing. She doesn't need 2 houses. And she's old, Claire. Old people forget." Claire's reply came cold, calculated. "Then let her forget somewhere else. We'll make sure she won't cause trouble." I didn't realize I was gripping the armrest until my knuckles turned white. My eyes stayed fixed on the screen, watching them move through my house, drinking my wine, plotting like it was a casual family project. Ethan glanced at me once, then looked back at the footage. His tone softened. "They tried to delete this," he said quietly, "but nothing truly disappears. Not if you know where to look." I nodded, unable to speak. On the screen, Claire's mother leaned forward, whispering something about the bank and getting the paperwork ready before she comes snooping around again. Ethan paused the video, zoomed in, and took a screenshot. "This is more than enough," he said. "You've got timestamps, faces, audio. It's solid evidence." I stared at the frozen image, Claire mid-sentence, her mouth open, her eyes lit with that familiar arrogance. It didn't feel like anger anymore. It felt colder, cleaner. The kind of emotion that doesn't make you shake. It makes you act. Ethan copied the files to a secure folder, encrypted them, and handed me a USB stick. "Keep this somewhere safe," he said, "and make another copy. If anything happens to the house, at least the truth stays alive." I took the small device from him, feeling its weight in my palm. It wasn't much, just a piece of plastic and metal, but it held everything I needed to turn the tide. "Thank you, Ethan," I said quietly. He shook his head. "You don't have to thank me, Mrs. Hale. You built this place. It's yours. They don't get to take that." After he left, I sat alone in the living room, the blue glow from the monitor still lighting the walls. Outside, the street was calm, just the sound of cicadas in the trees and the low hum of passing cars. On the screen, the last frame stayed frozen. Claire's hand raised mid-gesture, her mother smiling beside her. I looked at it for a long time, memorizing every detail. Then I turned off the computer, tucked the USB into a sealed envelope, and placed it in my desk drawer next to the bank documents and Victor's notes. For weeks, they had used lies to strip me of my dignity, to paint me as fragile, fading, weak. But lies rot when light touches them, and now I had the light. Victor moved faster than I expected. Within a day of our meeting, he had prepared the emergency petition, copied every document I'd brought him, and filed the papers with the county clerk. The language was precise and cold: a request for immediate injunctive relief to stop any transfer, a motion for temporary possession, and a formal complaint listing forgery, elder abuse, and fraud. He called me when the filing was entered and said only what mattered. The judge would review it first thing in the morning. That afternoon, Victor put me in touch with Captain Mary Collins. Mary and I had known each other for years. She'd been a neighborhood kid once, and later a woman who rose through the ranks of the county force. When she called, her voice was steady and without sentiment. "When the judge signs, we move," she told me. 2 hours notice, legal and final. We'll be there with the paperwork and an officer to supervise. Don't do anything that would complicate service. Let the process run clean. Her words were practical and sharp, exactly what I needed to hear. Victor and I went over the tactical details. He wanted certified copies of the forged documents and the CIA TV files Ethan recovered sealed as exhibits. He told me to bring originals where possible and to provide a written statement about every interaction I could recall. He arranged for a forensic handwriting analyst to be on call, and he asked the bank to prepare an affidavit confirming the account holds. Small things mattered: who had keys, whether there had been any recent recorded conversations, the inventory of missing items. Each piece could be the hinge on which the judge opened the door for us. That evening I sat in front of my mirror and smoothed the collar of a gray jacket I hadn't worn in months. It felt strange to care about appearance at a moment like this, but Victor had advised me that presence mattered in court and at the house when officers served a notice. The mirror reflected a tired woman with a steady jaw. I thought about what Mary had said, 2 hours notice, and imagined how quickly the house could shift from a noisy, disorderly scene to a controlled legal action. It made the plan both terrifying and real. We coordinated with the sheriff's office so that any removal would be official and enforceable. Mary explained how the notice would be delivered, how evidence would be cataloged, and how officers would ensure no property was taken out during the eviction. Victor arranged for a notary to accompany the team, and he prepared a sealed inventory list to be served and signed at the house. He also told me plainly that the moment would be public. Neighbors would watch, gossip would start, and their lawyers could try to delay by filing papers of their own. He had anticipated every stall and countered each with a next step. Before I slept, Victor called again to confirm the timing. The judge had reviewed the packet and would sign early the next morning. "We'll serve by 8, he said. 2 hours to vacate, and the sheriff will supervise the exiting. You won't have to face them alone." Hearing that made something coil in my chest, an odd mix of dread and resolve. I thought of the glass on my counters, the photographs in the halls, the way their voices had filled rooms that were mine alone. They had treated my home like a temporary rental. Tomorrow, the law would treat it like the property of a wronged owner. I laid out the documents Victor told me to keep close. The original deed, the copies of the forged transfer, the medical report, Ethan's footage on a USB, and the bank statements showing I had the funds and had not authorized any transfer. I also packed a small bag with a change of clothes and the list Victor wanted me to hand to the officer if asked. There was no triumph in preparing, there was simply the work of getting ready to reclaim what was mine. When I finally turned off the light, the house felt both smaller and sharper, as if it had been waiting for this. The rain had stopped and the street outside was quiet. 2 hours' notice meant a clock was set, and the next morning justice would come not with words, but with engines and boots. They had mocked me as helpless. Tomorrow they would meet the law. The morning broke clear and golden, sunlight spilling across the Savannah River like nothing in the world was about to change. But for me, everything had already shifted. 3 cars stopped in front of Magnolia House right on time: the patrol cruiser, Victor's sedan, and the notary's silver hatchback. Their engines cut off one by one, leaving behind a stillness that felt deliberate. I stepped out of the car, smoothing my gray jacket, my hair pinned neatly at the nape of my neck. The breeze carried the faint scent of salt and wet earth. From the porch, laughter drifted out, Claire's voice light and careless, narrating something into her phone. She was live streaming, of course, showing off her weekend house by the river. Mary Collins adjusted her badge and glanced at me. "Ready?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "Let's do it." We moved toward the porch. Claire's back was to us. Her camera faced the breakfast table full of fruit and mimosas, her mother and sister in robes. The sound of her voice carried into the yard. "Guys, look at this view. Can you believe it? Perfect morning at our Magnolia escape." Then Mary's voice cut through everything, calm and official. "By order of the Chatham County Court, you are required to vacate this property within 2 hours." The words hung in the air like a gavel striking wood. Claire turned slowly, confusion flickering before panic set in. The phone slipped from her hand and hit the porch with a soft thud. Her mother stood, eyes wide. "This is madness," she cried. "No," I said, stepping onto the porch, my voice even. "This is justice." For a moment no one moved. The children stopped talking. Veronica froze halfway up the stairs. The notary unfolded the documents, the official stamps catching the light. The officer stood at ease but alert. Victor walked up beside me, briefcase in hand, his face composed but watchful. Claire's face went pale, her voice trembling. "You can't just walk in here. This is our home." "This property," Victor said clearly, "belongs solely to Mrs. Margaret Hale. You and your family have been occupying it illegally. You are hereby given 2 hours to remove personal belongings under the supervision of law enforcement. Any item listed as property of Mrs. Hale must remain here." Mary stepped forward, calm and professional. "We're enforcing a lawful eviction and property reclamation. You can cooperate peacefully or have everything recorded and reported to the court. It's your choice." Claire looked around, desperate for support. "Michael!" she shouted toward the driveway, but no one answered. I watched her. The arrogance that had once filled every word now cracked into disbelief. Her mother whispered something about calling the lawyer, but her hands shook too hard to hold the phone steady. Veronica began gathering things in silence, no longer filming. The officers began noting items, photographing the rooms. The notary recorded the inventory, reading each line aloud. Victor stayed close to me, keeping a calm eye on the process. I stayed still, silent, watching the house slowly reclaim its shape as they stripped away what they'd brought in: clothes, suitcases, toys, and broken bits of what they'd tried to make theirs. At one point, Claire turned to me, tears forming behind fury. "You ruined our family," she hissed. I met her gaze and said quietly, "No, you did that when you tried to ruin mine." Her shoulders sagged, her defiance slipping into exhaustion. She looked at Mary, her voice breaking. "Can't we just talk about this, off the record?" Mary didn't flinch. "Ma'am, you had that chance before the court order. The time for talk is over. You now have 1 hour and 40 minutes. The next hour unfolded like slow theater. Boxes filled, voices rose and fell, doors slammed. I stood by the window, hands clasped in front of me, watching the sun slide higher across the water. Each sound, the zip of a suitcase, the creak of the stairs, was another piece of noise being pulled out of my home. When the last box was carried out, Claire's mother turned to me, trembling. "You'll regret this," she spat. I looked at her gently. "The only thing I regret," I said, "is ever letting you through that door." Mary gave a small nod to the officers. "Time's up." They escorted the last of them to the cars. Claire was the last to leave, clutching a bag to her chest, her eyes red, her phone still in her hand but turned off now. She paused by the porch steps, maybe to say something, maybe to curse me again. But nothing came out. I didn't speak either. I just stood there, silent, as she looked up at me one last time and then walked away. The cars pulled out of the driveway one by one. When the engines faded down the road, the only sound left was the river and the wind moving through the old magnolia trees. Mary came up beside me. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, I think I finally am." Victor handed me a single sheet, the signed acknowledgement of property restoration. My name at the top, the court seal at the bottom, legal and final. As they drove away, I stayed on the porch, my hands resting lightly on the railing. For the first time in months, the house was quiet, not hollow, not invaded, but still, mine again. And in that silence, I felt something strange. Not triumph, not relief, something stronger. For the first time, my silence made someone else tremble. For the first time, my silence made someone else tremble. Michael's car came screeching into the driveway just as the officers were finishing the paperwork. The tires kicked up gravel, the sound sharp against the quiet that had finally settled over Magnolia House. He jumped out before the engine stopped, shirt half-buttoned, eyes wild. "Mom, please." His voice cracked as he ran toward the porch. It was Claire. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I stayed where I was, one hand on the railing, watching him climb the steps that used to feel like home to both of us. Behind him, Mary and Victor stood still, waiting, not interfering. "You didn't mean it," I said softly. "You signed this." I held up the document, his own signature, bold and unmistakable, right below the false statement that I was unfit to manage personal assets. The paper trembled between us, caught by the wind. Michael's shoulders slumped, his mouth opened, but the words came out as a broken whisper. "We needed money. The kids. The bills. Claire said it was just paperwork, that you'd never know." I cut him off with a small shake of my head. "You could have asked," I said. My voice stayed even, almost calm. "All you had to do was ask." He looked at me then. Really looked, maybe for the first time in years. His eyes were red, his face older than I remembered. "I didn't want to beg," he said. "I wanted to handle it myself. Claire said this was just moving things around. I thought we'd fix it before you came back." "Handle it?" I repeated. "By forging medical reports? By declaring your mother incompetent?" He dropped his gaze, his hands trembling. The officer standing nearby turned away, pretending not to listen. Victor watched silently, his face unreadable. "I thought it was harmless," Michael murmured. "She said once the house was in my name, we could refinance. Pay off debts. You thought wrong," I said. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The sun reflected off the river, throwing pale light onto the porch. I looked at him. This grown man who once had tiny hands that clung to mine on that same riverbank, when life was simpler and love was enough. Now his shoulders were bent under the weight of greed and shame. "When you were little," I said quietly, "you used to tell me you'd build me a house one day. Do you remember that?" He nodded weakly. "I do." "Well," I said, "I built this one. I paid for it, brick by brick, with my own hands. And today I had to hire lawyers and police just to step inside it again." He pressed a hand to his face, the sound of his breath uneven. "I ruined everything." "No," I said. "You made a choice. And choices have consequences. You wanted independence, Michael? You've got it now." He looked up then, tears streaming freely, voice breaking. "Mom, please, I'll fix it. I'll pay you back. I'll do anything." I folded the paper neatly and slipped it into my jacket pocket. "There's nothing to fix," I said. "You can't repay trust once you've traded it for convenience." He took a hesitant step toward me. "Can you forgive me?" The question hung there, heavy and hollow. I thought of all the nights I'd spent worrying about him, all the sacrifices, all the quiet pride that had once filled this house. I met his eyes and answered the only way I could. "Not today," I said. "Maybe someday, but not today." He stood there, shoulders shaking, unable to speak. The man who had once declared his own mother unfit to live alone now looked utterly lost, not in fear of punishment, but in the realization that something far greater had been broken. I turned away, my voice low but steady. Go home, Michael. Take care of your children. Teach them what trust costs, and what it feels like to lose it. He didn't move for a long time. Then, slowly, he walked down the steps, the sound of his footsteps fading on the gravel. When the last car left, I stood alone on the porch, the papers locked in my hand and the river wind brushing against my face. Justice had been served, but peace would take longer. That was the moment I realized. Sometimes a mother's silence is the heaviest sentence of all. The sound of the officer's voice carried through the humid morning air, firm and unshakable. By the authority of the court, this property must be vacated immediately. Inside Magnolia House, chaos erupted. Ava screamed from the hallway, clutching a half-zipped suitcase, her voice cracking as she shouted at the officers. Claire's mother cursed loud enough for the whole street to hear, her words a mix of anger and humiliation. One of the children began to cry, a sharp, panicked sound that echoed through the once quiet rooms. Furniture scraped against the floor, drawers slammed, and the house, my house, shook with the noise of their undoing. From the porch, I could see the neighbors beginning to gather. Some stood on their lawns, whispering, others lifted their phones discreetly, pretending to check messages while they filmed. The whispers floated on the breeze, the kind that cuts deep but leaves no visible mark. So it was true. She took them to court. The old teacher won back her house. Mary, ever professional, raised her voice above the commotion. You have 30 minutes left. Please continue packing calmly. But calm was gone. Ava stumbled out first, her mascara streaked down her cheeks, dragging a duffel bag that thumped down each step. She turned toward me for a moment, and maybe to plead, maybe to curse. But the words never came. She just looked away and kept walking toward the car. Behind her, Claire's mother burst out the door, waving her hands, still shouting, You think you've won? You'll die in that house alone. Her voice cracked on the last word. One of the officers stepped forward and guided her gently toward the curb. The threat dissolved into sobbing. Inside, Claire's voice rose and fell like a storm. Where are the kids' things? Don't touch that. Put it in the car. Her tone was brittle, desperate. Every command she gave fell apart under its own weight. I stood on the porch, unmoving. My heart didn't race anymore. The noise didn't pierce me. I just watched the mess unravel. The same way they had once watched me leave in silence, proud and humiliated. One of the little boys, maybe 6 or 7, dropped his stuffed bear on the steps as they hurried past. I bent down, picked it up, brushed the dust from its ear, and handed it to him. He looked at me with wide eyes, confused, then mumbled a soft, "Thank you." I nodded. "Take care of it," I said quietly. He nodded back, clutching it tight. Claire was the last to come out. She looked nothing like the woman who once called me a parasite on my own porch. Her hair was tangled, her face pale, her hands shaking as she carried the last box. The live streamer, the confident hostess, year gone. Only a woman left with nothing but regret and noise behind her. She stopped at the edge of the steps, met my eyes, and for a second I thought she might apologize. But instead she whispered, "You'll never be happy again." I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just let her words vanish into the air. Victor stepped beside me, folding his arms as the officers began to clear the last of the scene. His voice was low but steady. "Justice served," he said. I shook my head. "No," I replied. Balance restored. The street quieted as the last car door slammed. The children's crying faded with the sound of the engine turning over. The crowd began to thin, one neighbor after another walking back inside. The porch creaked under my feet as I took a slow breath. The air felt different, lighter, not because it was peaceful, but because it was honest again. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is fueled by anger. What I felt now was cleaner and colder. It was order, returned to where chaos had lived. As the police cars rolled away, sunlight spilled through the moss-draped oaks, stretching long shadows over the lawn. The magnolias swayed gently in the breeze, as if the house itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. For the first time in months, the world around me was quiet. And in that quiet, I finally understood. I hadn't punished anyone. I had simply restored what was broken. 2 weeks later, the air along the river turned heavy and damp, the kind of Savannah afternoon that felt like the sky might collapse into rain at any second. Magnolia House was quiet again. The cleaning crew had finished days ago. The smell of dust and smoke was gone, replaced by the faint sweetness of lemon oil and magnolia leaves. I was on the porch, trimming dead stems from the potted plants, when I heard the sound of slow footsteps on the gravel path. When I looked up, Claire was standing by the gate. Her face was pale, drawn tight around the eyes. The polished arrogance that once followed her everywhere was gone. She hesitated before opening the gate, almost as if she expected me to shut the door before she reached it. I didn't move. I just waited. When she reached the porch, her voice came out small, unfamiliar. "I came to return what I took," she said, "and to say sorry." In her hand was a small velvet pouch, my jewelry, the ones she'd stolen and pawned off as misunderstandings. She held it like a peace offering she knew would be refused. I looked at the bag, then back at her. "You didn't have to come back," I said. "Yes, I did." Her voice cracked on the words. "You don't understand. Everything's falling apart. Michael, he won't talk to anyone. My mother blames me. We lost the apartment. I just wanted—" She stopped, unable to finish. The rain began to fall, soft, thin drops hitting the porch rail like ticking clocks. I opened the door wider, not to invite her in, but to keep us both under the awning. "Claire," I said quietly, "there's nothing left to explain." She swallowed hard. "You have every right to hate me." "I don't," I said. "I don't hate you. Hate keeps you tied to people you need to let go of." She looked up then, eyes wide with disbelief. "So you forgive me?" I took the pouch from her hand, felt the weight of it, familiar pieces of a life she tried to erase. I set it on the small table by the door. "Keep your apology," I said softly. "I already forgave you, but not for you, for myself." The words seemed to land heavier than anything else I could have said. She blinked as if trying to understand them. "You forgave me," she repeated, "but you'll never let me back in." "That's not what forgiveness means," I said. "It means I won't carry what you did anymore, but that doesn't mean I have to let it happen again." Her breath hitched. The tears came fast now. She turned slightly away, hiding her face, then stepped back toward the porch steps. "I don't expect you to ever trust me again," she said. "I just wanted you to know I'm sorry." I nodded once. "Then you've said what you came to say." She stood there for a moment, her shoulders trembling, the rain growing heavier around us. Then she turned and walked down the path, her shoes sinking slightly into the wet gravel. The pouch of jewelry stayed on the table untouched. From the doorway, I watched her figure fade into the mist, until the only sound left was the soft rhythm of the rain against the porch roof. Inside, the house was silent, the kind of silence that doesn't ache anymore, just settles. I sat down by the window and looked out toward the river, its surface blurred by falling rain. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about erasing what happened or making peace with those who hurt you. It was about choosing peace for yourself, about unclenching your hands and letting the past fall away piece by piece until there's nothing left to hold on to. And that day, I finally understood what it meant. A year later, Magnolia House was alive again. The shutters that had once been closed in silence now opened wide each morning. Light spilled through the kitchen windows, carrying the scent of fresh coffee and new beginnings. What had once been my private refuge had become something different, a place of learning, of rebuilding. Every Wednesday afternoon, the front room turned into a small classroom. Folding chairs lined up in neat rows, a whiteboard stood against the wall, and a sign outside read in simple letters, "Protect Your Dignity, a workshop for seniors." The idea had started small. After everything that happened, people from the neighborhood began stopping by, asking for advice, wanting to know how to protect their property, what to do if their family took advantage of them. At first, I only shared my story quietly, over tea or at the grocery store. Then one of the women from the church said, "You should teach this. We all need to hear it." So I did. I taught them how to recognize forged signatures, how to read bank notices, how to ask the right questions before signing anything. I taught them what I had learned through pain, that trust is not a legal defense and silence is not protection. Ethan came by often to help. He was the one who'd found the hidden footage that saved my case, and now he was setting up a new security system with better cameras. "This one backs up to the cloud automatically," he explained, typing commands on his tablet. "No one's erasing anything ever again." I smiled. "Good. This house deserves to remember." He grinned. "So do you." Later that afternoon, my granddaughter Emily arrived, 11 years old, curious, with her father's brown eyes but a gentler heart. She ran up the porch steps holding a small pot of marigolds. "These are for the front," she said proudly. "Dad helped me pick them." We planted them by the railing, her little hands covered in soil, the smell of earth and salt air mixing in the breeze. For a while, we worked in silence. Then she looked up at me suddenly. "Grandma," she asked, "did you hate them?" The question was soft, but it struck like a bell in a quiet room. I knew who she meant. I set down the trowel, brushed the dirt from my hands, and looked at her. "No, honey," I said gently. "I just stopped letting them hurt me." She seemed to think about that for a long time, then nodded. The kind of slow, thoughtful nod only a child can make when they truly understand something simple but deep. Inside the house, the late sun spilled through the glass, catching the framed photograph of my husband and me on our wedding day. The two of us stood there frozen in time, young, certain, unaware of the storms we'd weather and survive. I glanced toward the open door where the sound of laughter drifted in from the porch, Ethan testing the cameras, Emily humming as she watered the flowers. Magnolia House had seen betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak. But it had also seen justice, forgiveness, and renewal. It had endured, and so had I. I walked to the window, looking out at the yard bathed in gold. The marigolds glowed like small suns against the green. You don't win every battle by fighting, I thought. Some victories come from simply standing tall, from refusing to surrender your dignity no matter who tries to take it. And in that quiet moment, I felt free.